Hello there, and welcome back to Sleepy Science Guide. I'm really glad you're here tonight, wherever you are in the world, and I genuinely love thinking about all the different corners of the planet where these words find their way into someone's evening. I hope you've already found a comfortable position. I hope your body is starting to soften, and I want you to know, before we begin, that whatever kind of day you had, it's behind you now. The night is here, and the night, as we're going to discover together over the next couple of hours, is a very gentle place to be. Before we go any further, if this channel is part of how you wind down, if these slow and curious explorations help you find the edge of sleep, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It takes just a moment, and it genuinely helps this small, careful place reach other people who need it. And I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Leave a comment, just your country or your city, or a single word about where you are. I find it quietly wonderful to imagine all those different places, all those different beds and chairs and sofas, all those different nights connected by the same slow voice. Now, let's begin. There is a particular quality of mind that only visits at certain hours. You might know it. The way your thoughts begin to lose their urgency somewhere around 9 or 10 in the evening. The way questions that felt essential at noon start to feel less important, less pressing, more like distant ships seen from a very high cliff. The need to know things, to resolve things, to arrive at conclusions, all of it quietly retreats. And in its place, something else moves in. Something softer, a kind of patient openness, a willingness to simply sit with things as they are, unresolved and still, the way you might sit beside a fire without needing it to do anything other than burn. This is the state of mind we are looking for tonight. Not alertness, not analysis, not the sharp edge of concentrated attention. What we are looking for is the opposite of that. The comfortable willingness to hold something without fully understanding it. To let a question float, to let a mystery simply exist beside you, the way a word you don't recognize can still have a beautiful sound. And tonight, the thing we are going to hold, gently, without gripping it, without demanding anything from it, is one of the strangest and most quietly fascinating objects in the world. An old book, a small, worn manuscript, held together with leather and vellum, filled with writing that no one has ever deciphered and illustrations that no one has ever fully explained. A book that has been in the hands of emperors and scholars and cryptographers and artificial intelligences and has yielded not a single confirmed secret to any of them. A book that sits right now in a library at Yale University in a temperature-controlled vault, patiently waiting. Its name is the Voynich Manuscript. And here is the promise I am making to you before we go any further. We are not going to try to solve it tonight. That is not what this is. This is not a mystery show with a reveal at the end. There is no moment where the code cracks open and everything suddenly makes sense. The Voynich Manuscript has defeated every attempt at decipherment for over a century, and it will not be resolved in the next 2 hours. But that is not a problem. That is actually the point, because tonight, the unresolved nature of this book, its beautiful, patient refusal to explain itself, is exactly what makes it the perfect companion for the hours between waking and sleep. You don't need answers tonight. You just need something to drift beside. And this old, mysterious book, written in a language that may not be a language, illustrated with plants that may not be plants, filled with diagrams of a sky that looks almost, but not quite, like the sky we know. This is a very good thing to drift beside. Take one slow breath in now and let it out. Let your shoulders drop a little. Let your jaw soften. Let the questions you've been carrying today dissolve a little at the edges. The book is here, and so are you. And neither of you has anything to prove tonight. Picture a chest of old books in an Italian villa. The year is 1912. The villa is called Villa Torlonia in Castel Gandolfo, not far from Rome, and its stone rooms are full of things that have been stored for decades. Manuscripts and papers belonging to the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, who had been quietly collecting books and documents for centuries before the Italian government began pressing claims on their property. To protect what they had, the Jesuits moved their most valuable holdings into private storage. And there, in those chests, they waited. Into this villa comes a man named Wilfred Voynich. He is Polish by birth, an antiquarian bookseller by trade, a man with a particular gift for recognizing valuable things in unlikely places. He has been invited, through a complicated chain of introductions and promises of absolute secrecy, to look through what the Jesuits have collected. He opens chests. He turns pages. He holds manuscripts up to whatever light is available. And then his hands find something that makes him stop. He later described it as an ugly duckling, a strange, oddly beautiful thing, a manuscript unlike any other he had seen in his years of handling old books. The vellum, the thin treated animal skin that serves as its pages, is worn and slightly discolored with age, but intact. The pages are covered in writing, but the writing is like no alphabet he has ever encountered. Small, flowing characters moving from left to right across the page, each one suggesting familiarity while refusing to resolve into any known letter or symbol. And alongside the text, on almost every page, illustrations, plants with thick, unusual roots, stars arranged in circular patterns, small figures of women bathing in interconnected pools, diagrams that look like attempts to draw the cosmos. Voynich bought it. He paid for it as part of a private, clandestine transaction that he would describe only vaguely for the rest of his life, maintaining a cover story about chests in an ancient castle to protect the Jesuits from the Italian government's claims. He took it back to London and began showing it to scholars, convinced he had found something extraordinary. He valued the manuscript at $100,000, an enormous sum in 1912, the equivalent of several million today. He was certain it was important. He was certain someone would be able to read it. Nobody was. Nobody is. Not then, not now, not in all the years between. The manuscript went with Voynich's estate after his death in 1930. His widow kept it in a bank vault for decades because it could not be sold and she could not read it and there was nowhere else for it to go. A book dealer named Hans P. Krauss eventually acquired it from her estate. He couldn't sell it either. In 1969, Krauss donated the manuscript to Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, where it has lived ever since. It is cataloged as Beinecke MS 408. It is one of the most digitally viewed items in Yale's entire collection. Millions of people have clicked through its scanned pages in the years since Yale put it online. Millions of eyes across every time zone staring at the same flowing script and wondering what they are looking at, and no one definitively has been able to tell them. What we know about the physical object is actually quite precise. Scientists have used radiocarbon dating, measuring the decay of carbon isotopes in the vellum, to determine that the animal's skin was prepared between 1404 and 1438. That is the early 15th century, the period when Jan Hus was preaching in Bohemia and the printing press had not yet been invented, and books were still rare enough to carry real power. The ink and pigments used in the manuscript are consistent with materials available in that period. The manuscript is a genuine early 15th century object. Whatever it is not a modern forgery. It is genuinely old. It measures roughly 23.5 by 16 centimeters, smaller than you might imagine, closer to the size of a large paperback book than some massive tome. It has approximately 240 pages, though it is clear from gaps in the numbering that pages are missing, and the original manuscript may have contained 272 or more pages in 20 gatherings. Some pages are not single leaves, but fold out accordion style into larger diagrams. There is one particularly remarkable folded section that opens to reveal a diagram of 9 interconnected circular medallions, a cosmological drawing of some kind, that sprawls across the paper like a map of a mind. The text moves from left to right across each page. There are spaces between words, suggesting that what looks like words are indeed words. There are what appear to be paragraph breaks. The text carefully flows around the illustrations, suggesting the illustrations were drawn first and the text was added afterward, fitting itself around the shapes on the page. The writing has what experienced handwriting analysts describe as the easy flow of a long-established script, meaning whoever wrote it fluently, without hesitation, as though they had been writing in this script for years and were comfortable with it. This is not the writing of someone slowly, carefully inventing characters one by one. This is the writing of someone for whom this script, whatever it is, was natural. The manuscript is divided into sections based on what the illustrations show. A botanical section with page after page of plant drawings, an astronomical and astrological section with circular diagrams of stars and zodiac symbols, a biological section, strange and dense with small female figures moving through networks of pipes and pools, a cosmological section with the great folded diagrams of interconnected circles, a pharmaceutical section with drawings of jars and roots, and final pages of continuous text that may be recipes or instructions of some kind. These 6 sections give the book the structural feel of a reference work, a compendium, something made for consulting rather than reading straight through. It feels like a handbook for something, but for what? No one can say. This is the physical fact of the Voynich Manuscript, a small, worn book, 800 years old, sitting quietly in a climate-controlled vault in New Haven, Connecticut, written in a language that no one has been able to read. And now, let's follow it backwards through time a little, because its journey to that vault is itself a quiet and fascinating story. The letter was folded inside the manuscript when Wilfred Voynich first opened it in 1912. It was written in Latin, dated 1665, from a Bohemian scholar and physician named Johannes Marcus Marci, addressed to Athanasius Kircher, one of the most learned men in 17th century Rome. Kircher was a Jesuit polymath. He had attempted to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs. He had built elaborate models of the cosmos. He had written about music and light and volcanoes, and famously had never found a problem he wasn't willing to take on with enormous confidence and ultimately questionable results. Marci was sending the manuscript to Kircher, hoping he could read it. In his letter, Marci passed along a story he had heard from a friend who is now dead, that the manuscript had once belonged to Rudolph II, Holy Roman Emperor, who had bought it some decades earlier for 600 gold ducats. Rudolph was a particular kind of emperor, melancholy, brilliant, eccentric, deeply drawn to the occult. His court in Prague was famously full of alchemists and astrologers and people claiming to possess arcane knowledge. Rudolph collected strange things. He reportedly believed the manuscript was the work of the 13th century English scientist and philosopher Roger Bacon, a man famous in his own era for his interest in optics and natural philosophy, and for rumors that he possessed hidden knowledge. 600 gold ducats was a very large sum, roughly the equivalent of perhaps 200,000 modern dollars. Rudolph paid it, apparently, for a book he couldn't read, on the assumption that it contained something valuable enough to be worth that price. Whether that assumption was correct is still unknown. After Rudolph, the manuscript passed to Jacobus Horcicki de Tepenech, his court pharmacist, whose name is written on the first page of the book in ink so faded it is visible only under ultraviolet light. A signature pressed so lightly onto the vellum that it nearly vanished, but did not. Then it passed, through unclear means, to a Bohemian alchemist named Georg Beresch, who spent years trying to understand it, writing increasingly frustrated letters to Kircher, who seems to have responded politely, but not helpfully. Beresch died with the book unread. His friend Marcy inherited it, attempted Kircher one more time with the accompanying letter, and that is the last chain of provenance until the Jesuits and Voynich and the chest in 1912. But let's pull back further than Rudolph and his court. Let's consider the world in which this manuscript was created, because that world tells us something important about why a book like this could exist. The early 15th century in Europe was a world where knowledge was expensive. Not expensive in the sense of costing money, though it did cost money. Books were rare and valuable things, each one hand-copied by someone who spent their life learning to do exactly that. Knowledge was expensive in the deeper sense that it was scarce. It was concentrated in the hands of very few people. And those few people understood clearly that what they knew gave them a kind of power that was worth protecting. The monasteries and universities of the period were the primary places where learned knowledge was preserved and transmitted. A monk who understood herbal medicine, who knew which plants could treat which ailments, who could interpret astrological charts to determine the right moment for particular remedies. This was someone with a social value that depended entirely on the rarity of that knowledge. The moment that knowledge became common, the moment it could be found in any market stall or recited by any literate person, its value collapsed. Secrecy was not paranoia. It was practical economics. Physicians and alchemists and herbalists of the period routinely kept their most important methods private, passing them only to trusted students or family members or colleagues they could rely on. They wrote in cipher, they used abbreviations only they understood, they embedded instructions in apparent poems or prayers. The idea of protecting knowledge by making it unreadable was not eccentric, it was standard practice. If the Voynich manuscript was created for similar reasons, it would be entirely consistent with the norms of its time. Think about what the world looked like from a 15th century European window. The sky was not simply the sky. It was a clockwork of significance, the movements of planets and stars directly influencing the bodies and fates of the people beneath them. The plants in the ground were not simply plants. They were pharmacological agents, yes, but also cosmological symbols, entities with correspondences to planets and humors, and the organs of the human body. Everything was connected to everything else in a vast web of hidden correspondences. The job of the learned person was to understand those correspondences, to move through that web with knowledge and skill. A book that documented all of this, that listed the plants, described their celestial correspondences, illustrated the cosmological system in which they operated, provided instructions for their use, would have been enormously valuable. It would have been exactly the kind of thing you would encrypt if you wanted to protect it. It would have been exactly the kind of thing an emperor might pay 600 ducats for. Or it might have been something else entirely. It might have been a beautiful, elaborate thing that contained nothing at all. But we'll come to that question later, when the night is deeper and the mind is softer, and the question feels less like a threat and more like an interesting shape to hold in the dark. For now, simply sit with the image of it, a small book, moving through the hands of emperors and alchemists and Jesuit scholars in a world where knowledge was power and secrecy was wisdom, carrying its unreadable text through 5 centuries to arrive, eventually, in a climate-controlled vault where millions of people can stare at it on their screens, equally confused, equally transfixed. Let your breathing slow a little. Let your shoulders drop. The book has been patient for 600 years. It can wait a little longer while you settle into rest. There is something your eye does when it encounters the writing in the Voynich Manuscript. Something happens before thinking, before analysis, before any deliberate attempt to understand. You look at the text, and some part of your brain, the ancient, fast, automatic part, the part that operates far below conscious language, says, I can almost read this. Almost. Not quite, but almost. This is not an illusion. It is one of the most interesting things about the Voynich script, and understanding why it happens tells you something real about how the human mind processes visual information. The script that fills the pages of the Voynich Manuscript is sometimes called Voynichese by researchers, a somewhat affectionate name that acknowledges its uniqueness while giving it a category. It consists of around 20 to 30 distinct characters, depending on how you count certain ambiguous forms. The characters are mostly made of simple curved and straight elements, curves, loops, short strokes, a few shapes that look almost like letters you might recognize from Latin or Greek or Arabic. The handwriting is fluid and consistent. There are no corrections visible, no crossed out words, no hesitation in the strokes. Whoever wrote this was comfortable writing it. And when you look at a line of Voynichese text, your visual system does something remarkable. It scans the line, finds the spacing that suggests word boundaries, notices the varying lengths of the word like units, detects the rhythmic repetition of certain characters, and begins automatically, unstoppably, trying to match what it sees against every writing system it has ever encountered. This is pattern recognition, and it is one of the oldest and most fundamental things your brain does. Pattern recognition is not a sophisticated cognitive skill. It is a reflex. It happens in specialized regions of the visual cortex before conscious thought has any access to the process. Your visual system has been trained over years of reading and exposure to text to recognize the general shape of language, the approximate character of written words, the density of marks, the ratio of distinctive shapes to repeated shapes, the rhythmic spacing that corresponds to the word boundaries of a sentence. And when something has those general properties, your visual system responds as if it is looking at text. Voynichese has exactly those properties. Researchers have subjected the Voynich text to what are called information theoretic analyses, mathematical examinations of the statistical properties of the text as a sequence of symbols. These analyses look at things like how often does each character appear? How do character frequencies rank against each other? How variable are the lengths of the word-like units? How predictable is any given character given the characters around it? And what these analyses have found, consistently and across decades of study, is that Voynichese behaves like a natural language. It follows a statistical pattern called Zipf's law, a distribution that holds for every known human language, from English to Mandarin to ancient Sumerian, where the most common word appears twice as often as the second most common word, 3 times as often as the third, and so on down the ranked list in an inverse relationship. This distribution does not arise from random character generation. It is a signature of language, and Voynich has it. George Zipf first described this statistical law in the 1940s, about 5 centuries after the Voynich Manuscript was created. This is worth sitting with for a moment. The person, or persons, who created this text, assuming it contains genuine linguistic content, could not possibly have known to design their text to conform to a mathematical distribution that wouldn't be formally described for 500 years. Either the text genuinely follows language-like structure because it is genuinely language-like, or someone created an elaborate and statistically improbable counterfeit centuries before the statistics to detect it had been invented. Beyond Zipf's law, researchers from the University of Sao Paulo analyzed the word relationships in the Voynich text in 2014 using network analysis methods to look for clusters of related words and structural patterns. They found that the text organization is compatible with natural languages in 90% of cases. They identified what appear to be keywords, words that occur more frequently in certain sections and less in others, suggesting they carry specific subject matter meaning. There are words that appear primarily in the botanical section and rarely elsewhere. There are words that appear consistently in the astrological pages. If this were random character generation, such distributions would be extremely unlikely. And yet, alongside all of this evidence that the text has language-like properties, there are features that no natural language seems to share. The entropy of the text, a measure of how much information is carried per character, is unusually low. Natural languages have higher entropy because they need to distinguish between a larger number of distinct states. Voynich has an entropy level that some researchers have compared to highly constrained or encoded text, where the range of possible next characters is narrower than in free language. There are unusual repetitions, the same word appearing 3, 4, 5 times in a row in certain places, which natural languages generally avoid. And the vocabulary, while structured, is oddly limited in ways that distinguish it from most known languages. The text is like language. It is also not quite like any language. It sits in that uncomfortable, compelling middle ground. There is a name for the psychological experience of almost recognition. It is called the tip of the tongue phenomenon in its most familiar form. But what Voynich produces is something closer to what psychologists study under the concept of perceptual fluency, the ease with which a pattern is processed by the visual system, which creates a feeling of familiarity even in the absence of actual recognition. You look at Voynich and your visual system processes it smoothly because it has the density and spacing and rhythmic variation of text. And that smooth processing registers as familiarity. Your mind says, this is something I should be able to read, but it cannot read it. And in that gap between the feeling of familiarity and the absence of comprehension, something interesting happens. Attention is held. The mind leans in. The question opens. Your mind wants to read it, even when it can't. And that wanting, that gentle, frustrated reaching, is one of the reasons this book has held so many minds for so long. The visual system keeps saying almost, and the conscious mind keeps responding with a little more attention, a little more looking, a little more curiosity. It is a very quiet trap. a very gentle one, the kind you don't mind being caught in. Let your eyes soften now. You don't need to read anything tonight. The words will carry you, or they won't, and either way is fine. Your job, right now, is only to listen. Turn a page in the Voynich Manuscript. In your imagination, let your fingers feel the slight roughness of the vellum, and you are in the botanical section. These are among the first and most plentiful pages in the manuscript. Almost half the book, by page count, is devoted to these plant drawings, and they are extraordinary in a particular way that takes a moment to identify. They are almost right. Each page of the botanical section typically shows a single plant drawn large enough to fill the page, with its roots visible at the bottom, its stem rising, its leaves spreading to either side, and at the top, some suggestion of flower or fruit. The drawings are not crude. They show genuine botanical observation. The roots are specific. The leaf veination has been thought about. The relationship between stem and flower has a structural logic. Someone drew these plants while looking at something, or while remembering having looked at something. There is a quality of close attention in the line work that feels real. But the plants themselves are not real, or rather, they are not identifiable as real. Generations of botanists have spent considerable effort trying to match the Voynich illustrations to known species. And while occasional partial matches have been proposed, no single plant in the manuscript has been definitively identified. The roots have the right weight and branching structure for a particular genus, but the flowers are wrong. The leaves have the right shape for one species, but attached to a stem that belongs to another. The colors, the manuscript uses greens and reds and blues and yellows, are applied with a somewhat approximate quality, as though whoever colored the drawings did so from memory or instruction, rather than from direct observation of a living plant. One of the most comprehensive attempts to identify the plants was made by researchers Edith Sherwood and other botanists who, over years of careful analysis, proposed matches for more than 100 of the manuscript's plant drawings. Some of these proposed matches are genuinely compelling. A drawing with the right leaf shape and root structure to suggest a sunflower, which, if correct, would imply New World botanical knowledge in 15th century Europe. A remarkable possibility. Others are more speculative, relying on partial structural similarities that might be coincidental. What is clear is that the illustrator or illustrators were drawing from some kind of systematic knowledge or practice. The drawings are not random. They follow conventions visible in other medieval herbal manuscripts. The tradition of illustrating medicinal plants for identification and use that stretches back through the Middle Ages to ancient Greek sources. Medieval herbals were among the most commonly copied and illustrated manuscripts of the period. A reader in the 15th century, encountering the Voynich botanical section, would have recognized the genre immediately, even while being unable to identify the specific plants. And this is exactly the experience your brain has. When it looks at these pages, it knows what it's looking at. A herbal, a botanical compendium, a medicinal plant guide, without being able to name any particular plant. The genre is recognizable. The specific content is not. And in that gap between recognition and identification, the same kind of almost occurs that happens with the text. Your memory reaches for the name of the plant. Your experience of every herb garden you've ever seen or every botanical illustration you've ever looked at gets activated. Something in the shape of the root or the arrangement of the leaves feels almost like something you've seen before. Neuroscientists studying memory and recognition have identified what they call familiarity memory, a form of memory that provides a feeling of recognition without providing the supporting detail that would allow you to say exactly what you're recognizing or where you encountered it before. It is the sense of having seen something without being able to place it. It is different from recollection, which brings with it the specific context and the timeline. Familiarity is simpler and older and operates through different neural pathways. It is also more easily tricked. The Voynich botanical illustrations seem to engage familiarity memory specifically. They are the right genre, the right visual structure, the right general relationship between parts, root and stem and leaf and flower, arranged in the way that botanical illustrations are arranged. Without being any specific, plant your memory can actually locate. Your brain signals familiar. Your conscious mind says, but what is it? And the question hangs there, gentle and unresolvable, exactly the way a question should hang when you are drifting towards sleep. There is something almost tender about these drawings. Seen in this light, someone 600 years ago drew something with care and intention. They drew what they knew, or what they imagined, or what they needed to draw for reasons we cannot now determine. And across 6 centuries, the drawings have arrived here to be seen by your eyes, which recognize the form without being able to name the content. The knowing and the not knowing exist simultaneously in your visual cortex, producing that particular quality of almost. That is not a failure. That is a very specific kind of experience, an experience that belongs to the edges of things, to the territory between recognition and mystery. Let your body be heavy. Let the edges soften. You are in that territory right now, between knowing and not knowing, between waking and sleep. It is a very comfortable place to be. When you reach the astronomical section of the Voynich Manuscript, the book changes register. The intimate scale of the plant drawings, one plant per page, close and particular, gives way to something more expansive. The pages open into diagrams, circles within circles, stars arranged in patterns, concentric rings of female figures, each holding a labeled star rotating around a central zodiac symbol, and the diagrams fold out, accordion style, into even larger compositions, the paper unfolding to reveal something that feels like a map of the sky, or a map of time, or a map of something that encompasses both. The 12 diagrams that most clearly reference the zodiac show constellations we recognize. Pisces as 2 fish, Taurus as a bull, Sagittarius as an archer, but rendered slightly differently from the conventional European depictions, with their own particular visual character. Around each central symbol, arranged in 2 concentric bands, are small female figures, about 30 of them per diagram, each holding a star attached to her arm or hand by what looks like a cord or tether. Each star appears to be labeled in Voynich's text. What those labels say is unknown. Medieval European astronomical manuscripts followed fairly consistent conventions for depicting the zodiac, and the Voynich zodiac diagrams share enough with those conventions to be clearly related to the tradition, while differing in their specific choices. One particularly notable difference: the zodiac cycle in the manuscript begins with Pisces rather than Aries. This is unusual. Most zodiac sequences in European manuscripts begin with Aries, the first sign of the astrological year. Beginning with Pisces places you at the end of the conventional sequence, or at a different starting point, a different beginning of the cycle. The significance of this choice, if it is a choice, is unknown. The cosmological diagrams are more abstract and more unsettling in a quiet way. They are described in scholarly literature simply as cosmological, because no one has been able to identify what specific system or tradition they represent. Some of the diagrams are circular, with geometric arrangements of shapes and text. Others feature the large interconnected circles of the famous folded diagram, which shows 9 medallions connected by tubes or bridges, each medallion containing further diagrams, the whole composition resembling nothing so much as a diagram of a mind trying to map its own contents. The medieval cosmological tradition from which these drawings emerged was one that understood the universe as a series of nested spheres. At the center was the Earth. Around it moved the Moon, then Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, each enclosed in its own crystalline sphere. Beyond Saturn was the sphere of the fixed stars, the firmament with its zodiacal constellations. And beyond that, in some theological framings, was the unmoved mover, the primum mobile, the divine principle that set everything in motion without itself being moved. To draw this system was to do something more than illustrate. It was to participate in the system's logic, to demonstrate comprehension of the order underlying apparent chaos. Medieval scholars believed that studying the movements of the heavens was a form of theology, that understanding celestial mechanics was a way of understanding the mind of God. The circles within circles of the cosmological diagrams were not merely descriptive, they were contemplative. They were a form of meditation. Looking at the circular diagrams of the Voynich Manuscript, you can feel that quality, even without being able to read the text or identify the specific system they represent. There is a centripetal pull to circular diagrams. The eye moves toward the center, follows the concentric rings outward, finds the edge, and is drawn back toward the center again. It is a form that suggests completeness, wholeness, the idea that everything relevant is contained within the circle's boundary. The medieval mind understood this instinctively. The mandala, a term from Sanskrit, but describing a form that appears in virtually every human visual tradition, represents the cosmos as a circle, the self as a point within it, the practice of attention as a movement from the circumference toward the center. Medieval European cosmological diagrams were, in their way, a Latin Christian form of the same intuition. The universe has a center. The understanding of it moves inward from the outside, and in the stillness at the center is something that cannot be drawn, only approached. The Voynich cosmological pages have that quality of approaching. Whatever they specifically represent, they have the visual grammar of inward movement, of circles organizing space, of something central that the circles are organized around. You don't need to read the labels to feel the pull. Let yourself feel it now. Imagine a circle, not a complex one, just a circle, clean and complete with you at its center. Everything else at some distance from the center, the day, its demands, its unresolved questions, all at the circumference. And here, at the center, simply quiet. You are already there. The 20th century was very good at certain kinds of problems. The problems of logistics, of code breaking, of signals intelligence. These are problems where enormous human effort combined with mechanical assistance can grind through enormous possibility spaces and arrive at solutions. During the Second World War, teams of brilliant cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park in England, people who would eventually include Alan Turing, broke the German Enigma codes, not just through brilliance, but through systematic, methodical, exhaustive work that combined mathematical insight with mechanical computation. The codes fell. The messages became readable. The war was shortened. It would seem that a 600-year-old manuscript, however mysterious, should be much simpler than military codes designed to be changed daily and protected by entire intelligence apparatuses. And yet, the Voynich Manuscript has outlasted all of them. Among the codebreakers who tried were William and Elizabeth Friedman, arguably the greatest American cryptanalysts of the 20th century. William Friedman essentially invented the modern discipline of cryptanalysis. He trained the teams who worked on Japanese codes in the Second World War, wrote the foundational texts of the field, spent decades developing methods and techniques that remain important today. He worked on the Voynich Manuscript for decades. He gathered a team of skilled colleagues and applied the full repertoire of his professional lifetime to the problem. He failed, not partially, completely. He died unable to say with confidence what the manuscript contains. Prescott Currier, a U.S. Navy cryptographer who worked on the manuscript in the 1970s, observed something interesting. When the text is analyzed carefully, there appear to be two distinct statistical patterns in the script, particularly in the herbal section. He called them herbal A and herbal B. The patterns are subtle enough that later researchers have questioned whether they represent genuinely different hands or dialects, or simply variations in the writing of a single person over time. But the observation was real. The text is not entirely uniform. Linguists have brought their own analytical tools. Claire Bowen and Luke Lindemann at Yale applied modern computational linguistics to the manuscript, comparing its statistical properties to a large database of known languages and encodings. They found that Voynich cheese has higher-level organizational properties similar to natural languages, the way words cluster, the way certain word types tend to appear together. The large-scale structure of sections but differs at the character level, where it has lower entropy than natural languages and more predictable character sequences. Their conclusion: the text is probably not simply gibberish, but also probably not a simple substitution cipher of any known language. Computer scientists have contributed too. In 2003, Gordon Rugg, a computer scientist at Keele University, demonstrated that text statistically similar to Voynichese could be generated using a medieval device called a Cardan grill, a perforated sheet used to select characters from a table of syllables and word parts. This demonstration was important because it showed that the text's statistical properties, while language-like, could in principle be produced by a relatively simple mechanical process without requiring any underlying meaning. Rugg's work strengthened the hypothesis that the whole thing might be elaborate gibberish and weakened the assumption that statistical language likeness necessarily implies semantic content. Then came artificial intelligence. In 2018, researchers from the University of Alberta trained an AI system on the patterns of multiple known languages and used it to analyze Voynichese. The system concluded, based on character patterns and word structure, that the underlying language was most likely Hebrew, with vowels removed, which is consistent with certain medieval Jewish textual practices. The headline was dramatic: AI cracks Voynich manuscript. The follow-up was less dramatic. The actual translation produced by the system was largely incoherent, and linguists quickly pointed out that the methodology had significant problems. The AI had found a pattern. The pattern did not mean what the headline claimed. A more recent study in 2200 proposed a historically plausible encryption system based on a 15th century Italian card game called Naibe. The researcher demonstrated that a cipher based on this game could produce text with statistical properties matching Voynichese: Zipf-ion distribution, word length distribution, the characteristic burstiness of certain words appearing frequently in specific sections. The paper was careful to present this as a proof of concept, showing that such a cipher is historically possible and statistically consistent, rather than as a claim to have solved the manuscript. And that is where things stand. After more than a century of effort by some of the most capable minds in cryptography, linguistics, computer science, and artificial intelligence, the Voynich Manuscript has not been decoded. No proposed solution has been accepted by this scholarly community as definitive. Every claimed translation has been subjected to critical analysis and found wanting. The manuscript remains unread, and here is the thing worth sitting with in the quiet of this late hour. This is not a disaster. The manuscript has not failed to be what it should be. It simply is what it is. A book that has not been read, a code that has not been broken, a language that has not been spoken. These things do not require resolution to be interesting. They require only patience and presence and the willingness to sit with them exactly as they are. Sometimes the most honest answer is, we don't know. And the most honest response to that answer is not frustration, it is rest. There is a question that circles the Voynich Manuscript like a slow planet circling a dim star, never quite departing, never quite arriving. And the question is, what if it doesn't mean anything at all? This is the hoax hypothesis. The possibility that the manuscript is, in the technical sense, a fraud, that its text contains no genuine linguistic content, that the writing, however sophisticated in its surface properties, is meaningless, that someone, at some point in the 15th century or later, created a book designed to look like a secret compendium of hidden knowledge, and that the secret it contains is that there is no secret. The hoax hypothesis has a certain uncomfortable elegance. It explains everything at once. Why no one has been able to decode the text despite a century of effort. Why the statistical properties are language-like without being identical to any language. Why the illustrations are almost plants and almost stars without being identifiable plants or stars. If the creator was clever enough, they could produce a manuscript that felt meaningful without being meaningful. And the history of the period includes documented examples of exactly this kind of elaborate intellectual fraud. Forgeries designed to impress or deceive wealthy patrons with manufactured evidence of hidden knowledge. The strongest argument for the hoax hypothesis is simple. If the manuscript contained a real message in a cipher based on any known language, then the vast cryptanalytic effort of the 20th century should have been able to crack it. The fact that it has not been cracked, despite everything that has been thrown at it, suggests that either the cipher is so sophisticated that it exceeds our current ability to break it, or there is no cipher to break. The strongest argument against the hoax hypothesis is equally simple. Creating fake text that convincingly follows the statistical laws of natural language without modern computing to guide the process would be extraordinarily difficult. Zipf's law, word clustering, the coherent section-by-section variation in vocabulary, these properties are not intuitive. A medieval forger who managed to produce them would have had to achieve accidentally what it took modern scientists decades of analysis to describe. That seems improbable. But there is a third possibility, and it is the one that has always interested me most. The possibility that the question of meaning versus meaninglessness is not as binary as it first appears. Consider the possibility of a book created for purposes that don't require the text to be a cipher of a known language. Consider a book created as an aide-mémoire for an oral tradition, symbols that served as reminders for practitioners who already knew the content and needed only visual triggers. Consider a book created in an invented language, a private tongue used only by its creator, and perhaps a small circle of students, a language that died when they died. Consider a book created partly as genuine content and partly as protective obfuscation, with some pages carrying real information and others carrying carefully designed noise. Consider finally, and this is perhaps the most interesting possibility of all, the possibility of a book created simply as a book, as an act of making, as something that needed to exist in the world, not because it contained secret knowledge, but because the making of it was itself the point. Human beings have always made elaborate things for the joy and necessity of making them. The impulse to create order, to fill a page with marks that have the feeling of significance, to draw the plants you know, to map the sky you see, to put down in marks what cannot be put down in words. This is not a pathological impulse. It is a very human one, and the result might look, 600 years later, exactly like the Voynich Manuscript. What would it mean to accept that possibility? Not to conclude it is true, we cannot conclude anything with certainty, but to hold it as one among several equally plausible options. With no particular need to decide between them, it would mean letting go of the question of what the manuscript means and sitting with the question of what our need to know what it means tells us about ourselves. And sitting with that question in the quiet is actually quite peaceful. The brain has a need for certainty. This is not a metaphor or a generalization. It is a neurological fact. The amygdala, the almond-shaped structure deep in the temporal lobe, one of the most ancient parts of the mammalian brain, responds to ambiguity with a particular kind of heightened arousal. When the environment presents something uncertain, something that cannot be categorized or predicted, the amygdala activates, orienting the organism's attention toward the ambiguity, sustaining a mild state of alertness until the uncertainty is resolved. This response evolved because ambiguity in the ancestral environment was often a sign of potential threat. The rustle in the grass might be wind. It might be a predator. Not knowing which creates a specific cognitive demand. Maintain vigilance until the ambiguity resolves. This is adaptive. It kept our ancestors alive, but it means that the nervous system by default treats unresolved questions as mild sources of stress, as things that need to be resolved before full relaxation is possible. Psychologists measure individual variation in this response with a construct called intolerance of uncertainty, or IU. People with high IU experience significant distress when faced with ambiguous situations that resist resolution. They seek information compulsively, trying to convert the ambiguous into the certain. They find open questions exhausting and worrying. They prefer a bad certain outcome to a good uncertain one. High IU is associated with anxiety disorders, with rumination, with the specific pattern of circular worried thinking that keeps people awake at night. People with lower IU have a different relationship with ambiguity. They can hold open questions without being driven to resolve them immediately. They can experience uncertainty as interesting rather than threatening. Research suggests that this tolerance for ambiguity correlates with certain kinds of creative thinking, with the ability to sustain multiple hypotheses simultaneously, with what the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi described as the capacity for deep, absorbing engagement, the flow state. The mind that can tolerate not knowing is also the mind that can stay fully present with something complex and unresolved. This matters for sleep because the transition from wakefulness to sleep requires, among other things, a willingness to release control, to allow the mind to become something other than the problem-solving, certainty-seeking, question-answering apparatus it has been all day. Sleep requires surrender, not passive surrender, but active, chosen surrender. The willingness to say, I don't need to know. I don't need to resolve. I can let this stay open. I can put it down. I can be here in this particular darkness without needing to understand everything about it. The Voynich Manuscript is, in this sense, a very useful object. It is a 600-year-old invitation to practice tolerance for uncertainty, to spend time with something beautiful and strange and unresolved without demanding that it become otherwise, to look at the flowing script and feel the almost recognition without chasing it into frustration, to look at the almost plants and feel the familiar strangeness without needing to name them, to look at the circular cosmological diagrams and let the concentric rings move inward without needing to arrive at a center that answers all the questions. The neuroscience of Tibetan Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron's teachings on groundlessness, the practice of dwelling in uncertainty without grasping for solid ground, aligns remarkably with what researchers have found about flexible cognitive processing and emotional resilience. The brain, under conditions of high certainty seeking, narrows its attention and increases its arousal. The brain, under conditions of accepted uncertainty, broadens its attention and decreases its arousal. Acceptance of not knowing is not cognitively passive. It is an active state, and it is associated with calm, with expanded attention, with the kind of relaxed awareness that is the antechamber of sleep. You have been practicing this all night. You have been sitting with an unresolved mystery and not demanding its resolution. You have been letting the almost language and the almost plants and the almost cosmos exist beside you without reaching for them. And if your body has softened, if your breathing has slowed, if your mind has loosened its grip on the questions it was carrying when you lay down, that is not coincidence. That is what tolerance for uncertainty actually feels like. In the body, that is what it means to let the unknown be gentle. The Voynich Manuscript has been not understood for 600 years. It can be not understood for a little longer while you rest. There is a transitional state between waking and sleep that the ancient Greeks noticed, named, and thought about with considerable care. It comes from two words, hypnos, meaning sleep, and agogos, meaning conductor or leader. The word is hypnagogia, the threshold, the borderland, the place where wakefulness ends and sleep begins, which is not a single moment, but a region, a stretch of changing terrain that the mind crosses every night without necessarily being aware of it. In this region, the brain's electrical activity undergoes a specific transformation. During full wakefulness, the brain generates what researchers call beta waves, high-frequency oscillations in the 14 to 30 hertz range, associated with active thinking, focused attention, the kind of alert cognitive processing that characterizes problem-solving and decision-making. As you relax, as the demands of the day recede, the brain shifts toward alpha waves, slower oscillations in the 8 to 13 hertz range associated with calm and relaxed wakefulness, the pleasantly unfocused awareness of someone sitting quietly without particular demands on their attention. And as you drift further, as sleep begins to approach, alpha waves give way to even slower theta waves, 4 to 8 hertz, which are associated with the early stages of sleep, with deep relaxation, and with a particular quality of mental processing that is neither fully conscious nor fully dreaming. In the theta range, the prefrontal cortex, the area most associated with logical reasoning, critical evaluation, and the monitoring of thought for accuracy and coherence, becomes less active. The filtering mechanisms that normally govern which thoughts reach conscious awareness and which get suppressed begin to loosen. And in that loosening, something interesting happens. The mind becomes more associative, more fluid, more willing to make unexpected connections between things that the waking mind would keep separate. Images arise that have the quality of being received rather than constructed. Not something you deliberately imagined, but something that appeared. Sounds that seem external, but are internally generated. The sense of being in a particular place that is not the room you are lying in. Brief, fragmentary narratives that have the convincing texture of experience. This is hypnagogia, and approximately 70% of people experience at least some version of it regularly, though most are not aware that what they're experiencing has a name or a scientific description. It is the ordinary magic of falling asleep, the nightly passage through the borderland. Now here is an interesting question. What would it be like to look at the Voynich Manuscript while in the hypnagogic state? The question is not entirely hypothetical. When researchers at MIT and Harvard developed a technology called Dormio, a device that monitors physiological signals to identify when someone has entered hypnagogia and then provides audio cues to keep them suspended in that state, rather than falling deeper, they found something remarkable. The hypnagogic state is a window of unusual receptivity and creative connection. People in the hypnagogic state, gently prompted with a concept, would incorporate it into their hypnagogic imagery in ways that reflected associative, non-literal thinking. The concept of a tree might appear as a person whose arms were branches, or as a feeling of standing still while things moved around you. The hypnagogic mind makes poetic connections rather than literal ones. Looking at the Voynich Manuscript in the hypnagogic state, the almost language might become something more. The visual system, loosened from its waking demands, might find the characters more recognizable, might approach the script with the same fluid associativity that allows hypnagogic imagery to be so vivid. The almost plants might bloom into something specific, some plant from deep memory, surfacing in the way that hypnagogic imagery surfaces, with the texture of reality, but without the constraints of waking logic. Scholars have noted something interesting about how people report their experiences of looking at the manuscript. There is a consistent description of the experience as resembling trying to remember something forgotten. Not a frustrating search, but a pleasant, slightly drowsy reaching. The almost recognition that the script produces, the slightly familiar quality of the plants, the circular pull of the cosmological diagrams, these are properties that seem designed, intentionally or not, to produce exactly the quality of attention that characterizes the hypnagogic border. You have been in or near that border for a while now. The words may have been washing over you, with less of the precise sequential comprehension that characterizes alert reading, and more of the ambient reception that characterizes deep relaxation. This is not a failure, it is an arrival. It is the borderland doing what the borderland does. Salvador Dali, the surrealist painter, famously tried to extend the hypnagogic state artificially. He would sit in a chair holding a heavy key over a metal plate on the floor. As he drifted toward sleep, his hand would relax. The key would fall, the sound would wake him, and he would capture the imagery of the hypnagogic threshold before it dissolved. Thomas Edison reportedly used a similar technique with steel balls and a metal plate. They were after what the threshold provides, the associative, surprising, rules-free images that arise when the brain is neither fully awake nor fully asleep. The Voynich Manuscript, in its way, provides the same thing, not by being a cipher to be decoded, but by being a threshold object, something that holds you in the territory between knowing and not knowing, between recognition and mystery, between the waking demand for answers and the sleeping willingness to let questions simply float. You can look at it and not know what you're looking at, and that not knowing can be restful rather than frustrating. You can be present with the mystery without being threatened by it. This is, perhaps, the deepest reason the manuscript has held so many minds for so long. It is not just a historical puzzle. It is an object that reliably produces a particular quality of consciousness, a quality very close to the one you are approaching right now. Let the words carry you there. Let the threshold open. Whatever comes next, dream or darkness or the gentle nowhere of deep sleep, let it come. There is a question that the Greek philosophers were better at asking than answering, and that is perhaps why their answers have lasted so long. The question is, what is the relationship between knowing and living well? Socrates, who famously knew nothing, or rather, who famously knew only that he did not know, and who found this liberating rather than paralyzing, walked through the marketplace of Athens asking questions that he had no intention of answering. He asked what courage was, and what justice was, and what beauty was, and what knowledge itself was. His interlocutors always began by thinking they knew, and ended by discovering that they didn't. And Socrates seemed to consider this outcome not a defeat, but a gift. The discovery of not knowing, he suggested, was the beginning of genuine inquiry. The person who thinks they know is closed. The person who knows they don't know is open. This is, famously, a position that is very easy to romanticize and very difficult to actually practice. Not knowing feels like incompetence. The social world rewards people who project certainty, who speak with authority, who present themselves as having answers. The admission of ignorance is culturally coded as weakness in most contexts. We teach children that asking questions is good, and then gradually, over the years of their education, create systems that reward them for having answers and penalize them for having questions. But here is what the neuroscience of epistemic humility, the formal study of people who acknowledge the limits of their own knowledge, suggests. The willingness to say, "I don't know," is associated with better decision-making. People who can hold genuine uncertainty tend to update their beliefs more accurately when new information arrives, because they haven't invested emotionally in a fixed position that needs to be defended. They make fewer catastrophically confident errors. They are, in certain crucial ways, smarter. Not because they know more, but because they carry their not knowing more gracefully. The Stoic philosophers took a related position. Marcus Aurelius, who was not only a philosopher but an emperor, wrote in his private journal, the book we now call the Meditations, about the practice of distinguishing between what is within our control and what is not. The state of his empire, the behavior of others, the past, the future, not within his control, his own responses, his own attention, his own equanimity, within his control, and the disciplined practice of directing effort only toward the former and accepting the latter with equanimity, he described as one of the foundations of a well-lived life. The Voynich Manuscript is, in the Stoic sense, not within our control. Its meaning, if it has meaning, will reveal itself when it reveals itself, or it won't. The effort to force a revelation has been made by the best minds of the last century, and the effort has not produced revelation. What is within our control is how we hold this fact, whether we hold it as frustrating, as a problem to be solved, as an insult to our intelligence, or whether we hold it as interesting, as an open space, as an invitation to practice the kind of equanimity that the Stoics thought was the precondition for everything else worth doing. Buddhist philosophy adds another layer. The Buddhist teacher Shunryu Yuzukuzi famously said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. The beginner's mind, shoshin in Japanese, is not the ignorant mind. It is the mind that remains open even as competence grows. The mind that doesn't close around its knowledge and defend it, but holds it lightly, ready to discover that things are not what they seemed. The Voynich Manuscript enforces a beginner's mind. No matter how expert you become in cryptography, in medieval manuscripts, in computational linguistics, in the history of alchemy, the manuscript will not reward expertise with certainty. It will give you more sophisticated questions, more refined not knowing, but it will not give you the satisfaction of a solved problem. And this, paradoxically, makes it one of the most honest objects in the world. It does not pretend to yield what it does not contain. It simply is what it is, in whatever that turns out to be. There is a kind of wisdom in that, not the wisdom of knowing, but the wisdom of remaining. The wisdom of an object that has been handled and examined and pored over by hundreds of brilliant people and has calmly, patiently continued to be itself, undisclosed. I don't know is three of the smallest words in the English language, and saying them genuinely without performing them, saying them from a place of true equanimity rather than either false modesty or real defeat, is one of the harder things a mind can do. It takes practice. It takes a particular kind of courage that doesn't look like courage because it doesn't assert anything. The manuscript models it. 600 years of not knowing, held quietly. Now let's consider the possibility that the Voynich Manuscript is a mirror. Not literally, of course. It is a book made of vellum and ink and the particular green pigment that medieval artists made from verdigris or malachite, bound in a leather cover that is itself centuries old. But metaphorically, as a surface that reflects, it may be one of the most revealing objects in the history of human scholarship. Consider what people have seen in it. Roger Bacon, the 13th century natural philosopher who experimented with optics and gunpowder and wrote cryptically about knowledge that could transform the world. People looked at the manuscript and saw Roger Bacon, the learned English friar ahead of his time, preserving dangerous knowledge in cipher. John Dee, the 16th century mathematician and astrologer who served at the court of Queen Elizabeth I and was rumored to communicate with angels. People looked at the manuscript and saw John Dee, the Renaissance magus, drawing on celestial correspondences, encoding his angelic conversations. Leonardo da Vinci, the supreme Renaissance polymath. Some researchers have looked at the botanical illustrations and seen the hand that drew flying machines and anatomical studies. Franciscan nuns writing medical knowledge for a Spanish queen. Aztec scribes documenting New World plants. A single eccentric scholar writing in a private language that no one else ever learned. Each generation, each cultural moment has seen in the manuscript something that reflects the concerns and fascinations of its own time. In the early 20th century, when cryptography was becoming a scientific discipline and codes were seen as the key to military advantage, the manuscript was primarily a cryptographic problem. In the mid-century era of computers, it became a computational problem. In the age of artificial intelligence, it became a machine learning problem. Each framing brought with it assumptions about what the solution would look like, and each set of assumptions shaped what people found. This is not a failure of scholarship. It is an honest description of how human inquiry works. We bring ourselves to problems. We bring our categories, our assumptions, our historical moments' deepest beliefs about what explanation looks like and where it comes from. And objects that resist our frameworks reveal those frameworks to us in ways that objects that yield to them do not. The Voynich Manuscript by refusing to yield to any framework, has become a kind of diagnostic of whoever is looking. A cryptographer sees a cipher. A linguist sees a language. A skeptic sees a hoax. A romantic sees a lost civilization. An artist sees a beautiful object whose meaning is irrelevant. A philosopher sees an invitation to sit with not knowing. What do you see? It is not a trick question. Whatever you see when you imagine holding that small book, turning those worn vellum pages, looking at the plants that almost are plants and the script that almost is language, whatever image or feeling or response arises, that is information about you, about what you carry, about where you are tonight in your own relationship with certainty and mystery. The manuscript doesn't need you to see anything in particular. It has been seen by thousands of people and has remained itself through all of them. It is patient in a way that only very old things can be patient. It has time. You are the one who is traveling tonight. You are the one moving across the border from waking to sleep, carrying the day's residue into the night's dissolving. And the manuscript, held lightly in the mind's hand, can be a companion for that particular journey. Not because it tells you anything, but because it doesn't demand anything from you either. It simply is. And you can simply be beside it without the need for resolution or revelation or arrival at any particular understanding. Being beside something you don't understand without needing to understand it, this is the practice. You've been doing it all night. You've been doing it well. Time has a way with things. It is the one force that nothing resists. Not stone, not metal, not the most carefully protected document in the most carefully sealed archive. Everything that is made will eventually be unmade. Every language that is spoken will eventually fall silent. Every civilization that rises will eventually become archaeology, then mythology, then a line in a history book, then a name without context, then silence. This is not a frightening thought. It is simply a true one. And truth, held quietly, is always more comfortable than the anxiety of trying to hold back what cannot be held. The history of human language is full of systems that arose, flourished, and fell silent. Linear A, the script of the ancient Minoan civilization of Crete, was written on clay tablets between roughly 1800 and 1450 BCE, roughly 3,500 years ago. It has never been deciphered. The Minoan civilization that created it vanished suddenly, probably in the aftermath of volcanic eruption and the subsequent collapse of trade networks. And with it went every living memory of how to read what they had written. The tablets survive. The language does not. The Indus Valley script, used by the civilization that built the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in what is now Pakistan and northwest India around 2600 BCE, remains undeciphered today. Over 4,000 symbols have been identified. The civilization that created them was sophisticated. It had standardized weights and measures, advanced drainage systems, evidence of long-distance trade. But what those symbols meant, what language they encoded, what the people who made them were trying to say, all of it gone. 5,000 years of silence. Rongo-Rongo, the script of the indigenous people of Easter Island, was still being written and read in the 19th century. There were people alive then who could read it. Then European colonists arrived and introduced diseases that killed 90% of the island's population, and kidnapping raids carried away many of the remaining adults to work as forced laborers in Peru. And within a single generation, the knowledge of how to read Rongo-Rongo was almost entirely gone. What fragments survived were difficult to verify and modern scholars have not been able to reconstruct the reading with certainty. These are not isolated tragedies. They are the ordinary fate of knowledge. Most of what human beings have ever known, felt, created, or understood is gone. The vast majority of all writing ever produced before the printing press has not survived. The vast majority of all speech ever spoken, all music ever performed, all visual art ever made, all technical knowledge ever practiced, gone. What we have is a small, random, partially preserved fraction of an enormous total, and we navigate by it as best we can. The Voynich Manuscript might be a fragment of something that was once larger, once understandable, once embedded in a living tradition where the text had readers and the plants had names and the cosmological diagrams corresponded to a system of thought that made sense to people who had learned it. And perhaps that tradition is simply gone, not lost in the sense of being hidden somewhere, waiting to be found, but gone in the way that the spoken language of the Minoans is gone, not preserved anywhere, not surviving in any living memory, not written down in any form that could serve as a key. If that is the case, then the Voynich Manuscript is not a puzzle waiting for a solution. It is a record of a silence, a document that arrived from the past, carrying its contents, whatever they were, and left behind only the form, the shape of knowledge without its substance, the vessel without the water. And there is a particular kind of beauty in that. The vessel itself is exquisite. The form of the writing, even without its meaning, is aesthetically compelling. The illustrations, even without their reference, are vivid and strange and alive. The cosmological diagrams, even without their cosmological content, have the meditative pull of circles within circles, of things organized around a center. The beauty did not depend on the meaning. The beauty has survived the meaning, if meaning there ever was. And what has been preserved across 600 years of handling and storage and examination and wonder is not a secret. It is a surface, a beautiful, strange, honest surface that reflects back to us our own relationship with time, with loss, with the things that do not survive, and with our enduring human impulse to look at what remains and find in it something worth attending to. The insects of the early 15th century, the ones that crawled through whatever garden the Voynich illustrator was observing, are gone. The herbalist or scholar or maker who held this book first is gone. The language, if it was a language, is gone. But the book is here, and you are here. And between the two of you, in the quiet of whatever night this is in, whatever corner of the world you're in, there is a small, genuine contact across 6 centuries. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite beautiful. Think about what night is, physically. The Earth turns on its axis at roughly 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, and as it turns, the side facing away from the sun enters the shadow of its own bulk. Night is not an absence. It is a position. It is where you are when the planet has rotated you out of the direct path of sunlight. And in that position, in that shadow, the sky above you changes character entirely. The blue scattering of light that makes the daytime sky opaque to anything beyond the atmosphere dissolves. And through that dissolving, you can see the universe, properly see it, without the interference of scattered light. For the first time in the day, the stars that were always there, always burning, always at their enormous distances, become visible. The fact that they were always there but became visible only in the dark is one of the quiet truths of the night. Night is not emptiness, it is depth made visible. The medieval mind had a relationship with night that we, in the era of electric light, can barely imagine. The darkness was genuinely dark, not the attenuated darkness of a suburban bedroom with streetlight coming through the curtains, but the real darkness of a world lit only by fire and candle and moon. And in that darkness, the sky was fully present in a way it never is for most modern people. The Milky Way, visible as a broad river of light, individual stars so clear their colors could be seen, the slow, patient movement of the constellations through the seasons, tracking time in a way that people could feel intuitively in their bones. The medieval cosmologists who drew those circular diagrams that appear in the Voynich Manuscript understood the sky not as distance, but as presence. The stars were not far away. They were above. The cosmos was not indifferent. It was legible. Its movements told you when to plant and when to harvest, when to expect changes in weather, what qualities the coming season would carry. The sky was a text, and learning to read it was both practical and theological. The Voynich astronomical pages are, in some sense, an attempt to bring that text down from the sky and into the manuscript, to make portable what was otherwise only available by looking up on a clear night, to encode the sky's information in a form that could be carried, consulted, passed along. This is what books have always been, attempts to make what is large and distant into something that can be held and read. But something happened in the transition from sky to page. The information, whatever it was, became encoded in a script no one can read, attached to diagrams that almost, but not quite, correspond to any known astronomical tradition. The sky was compressed into the manuscript, and in that compression something essential was lost, or hidden, or transformed into something else. What arrived in the pages is a suggestion of the sky, the circular forms, the star arrangements, the concentric rings of the zodiac, without the sky's actual legibility. This is the Voynich Manuscript as night, as the thing that holds the shape of what is vast and luminous, without itself being vast and luminous, as the darkness that surrounds rather than contains the light, as the position in which depth becomes visible precisely because the illuminating noise has been removed. Night is not empty, it is deep, and the manuscript is like night in this way. It is not void, it is not absent, it is depth, a container that points towards something without being able to give you that something directly. A book that says, there was knowledge here, there was meaning here, there was a human mind here, attending to things worth attending to. I cannot give you that knowledge directly, but I can give you the shape of the attending. And sometimes, the shape of attending is enough. Sometimes, when the world has been very loud and very fast and very demanding, what you need most is not more information, not another answer, another explanation, another resolved question. What you need is simply to be present beside something that holds its silence well, something that has been attending for longer than you have been alive, something patient and honest and undemanding that does not require you to perform comprehension or arrive at any particular understanding. The Voynich Manuscript holds its silence very well. It has been doing it for 600 years. Tonight, you can simply be beside it, and that is enough. And so, we have arrived at the end of a long, slow journey through one of the world's strangest and most beautiful objects. We have followed it from a chest in an Italian villa to a climate-controlled vault at Yale. We have looked at its flowing script through the lens of statistical mathematics and linguistic analysis and the neuroscience of pattern recognition. we have sat with its almost plants and its almost cosmologies and its circular diagrams that pull the eye inward without revealing what is at the center. We have held the question of whether it means anything without needing to answer it. We have let the question be what it is, open and patient and very old. And through all of it, your body has been moving in one direction, toward rest, toward the particular quality of consciousness that comes when the day has been released and the night has been fully entered, toward the borderland hypnagogia, where the brain's electrical rhythms slow and the filtering mechanisms loosen and the mind begins to receive rather than to produce. You don't need to understand the Voynich Manuscript. No one understands it, including the people who have spent their professional lives on it. That is not your failure. It is simply the manuscript's condition, and the manuscript is fine with it. The manuscript has been not understood before. You don't need to understand the night either. Not in the precise, technical sense of knowing the electromagnetic spectrum of starlight or the exact speed of the Earth's rotation or the mechanics of the circadian rhythm that is pulling you towards sleep right now. The night does not require your understanding. It requires only your presence and your willingness to be in it. Everything is exactly as it should be. The Voynich Manuscript is in its vault, patient and strange and whole. The night is outside your window, doing what the night does, being vast and quiet and full of the depth that becomes visible when the light withdraws. The stars that were there all day are visible now. The questions you were carrying today are quieter now, less urgent, less pressing, moving toward the circumference of attention rather than its center. Some things are meant to remain quiet. Not everything needs to speak. Not every mystery needs a resolution. Not every night needs to produce an answer. Some nights are simply for being present, for letting the day become something that was, rather than something that is, for allowing the body its ordinary magic of rest, and the mind its ordinary dissolving into the slower rhythms that restore it. The script on the Voynich Manuscript continues to flow line after line across vellum that is 600 years old, in a script that has never been read and may never be. And that is fine. The universe contains many things that will never be understood, and it is not diminished by that. You contain many things that will never be fully understood, and neither are you. You can rest now. Let the weight of the day fall away. Let the shoulders finally fully drop. Let the hands open. Let the breath do what it knows how to do without your assistance, moving in and out with the patient rhythmic intelligence of a body that has been breathing its entire life and will keep breathing through the night without any help from you at all. The manuscript is there, in New Haven, in its vault, quiet and complete and unknown. And you are here, wherever you are in the world tonight. And the distance between those two places, across which this voice has been traveling for the last 2 hours, is itself a kind of mystery. How sound becomes signal, becomes data, becomes again sound, becomes meaning, travels across time zones and underwater cables and the strange invisible infrastructure of the modern world to arrive in your ears, in your room, on this particular night. You don't need to understand how that works either. It works. And here you are. The night holds you. The darkness holds you. The question that has been open all this time, what does the manuscript mean? What does any of it mean? What are we doing here in this brief and inexplicable existence? That question can be held without being answered, tonight and every night, the way the manuscript holds its own unanswered question with perfect patience. Let it be open. Let it float. Let the attention release its grip on the day and on the questions and on the need to know. and let it dissolve into the slower, wider, less structured awareness that is on the other side of wakefulness. You have been kind to yourself tonight, spending these hours in the company of something mysterious and beautiful and undemanding. The book does not need anything from you. The night does not need anything from you. You can stop now. You can let the words blur into something undifferentiated and soft. You can let the last thing your waking mind holds be simply this, that there are old things in the world and they are patient, and they have been holding their mysteries since before you were born, and they will continue holding them after you wake up tomorrow. And none of this is urgent. None of this requires resolution tonight. None of this needs you to do anything except what your body is already doing. Breathing, softening, releasing. And now, very gently, sleep. There is something worth exploring in the specific quality of attention that the Voynich Manuscript demands. Not the effortful, goal-directed attention of problem-solving, the kind that narrows to a point and drives forward with purpose. But something different, something more like the attention you give to a fire, or to rain against a window, or to music that you don't quite know playing from somewhere else in a building. An attention that is broad rather than narrow, receptive rather than active, present without being goal-directed. Psychologists distinguish between two fundamental modes of attention. The first is called top-down attention, driven by your goals, your intentions, your explicit cognitive tasks. When you are proofreading a document, you are using top-down attention. When you are searching for a name in a phone book, or following the plot of a complex film, or trying to decode an encrypted message, you are using top-down attention. It is characterized by effort, by directionality, by the explicit mobilization of cognitive resources toward a specific objective. The second mode is called bottom-up attention, driven not by your goals, but by the properties of the stimulus itself. Bright colors, sudden sounds, unexpected movements, and, crucially, stimuli that are partially familiar but not fully recognized. All tend to capture bottom-up attention. This mode of attention is less effortful, less directed, less exhausting. It is the mode in which you find yourself absorbed by a sunset, or by the behavior of an animal, or by the patterns in wood grain. It is the mode in which children naturally spend much of their time before they are trained into the more effortful mode of school. The Voynich Manuscript, with its almost language and its almost plants and its almost cosmologies, is extraordinarily effective at capturing bottom-up attention. Each feature of the manuscript, the flowing script, the illustrated plants, the circular diagrams, has the properties that naturally attract and hold the eye without demanding the effortful cognitive resources of top-down processing. You are drawn to it. You look at it. You remain looking without quite knowing why. And this shift from top-down to bottom-up attention is itself physiologically restful. Top-down attention is metabolically expensive. The prefrontal cortex, which coordinates goal-directed thought, is one of the most energy-hungry regions of the brain. Sustained top-down attention depletes neural resources and produces the familiar experience of mental fatigue, the tiredness that comes not from physical exertion, but from sustained cognitive effort. Bottom-up attention, by contrast, allows the prefrontal cortex to rest. It is associated with lower arousal, lower metabolic demand, and the kind of pleasant, directionless engagement that is genuinely restorative. Attention restoration theory, developed by Rachel and Stephen Kaplan at the University of Michigan, describes this phenomenon in the context of natural environments. They found that spending time in natural settings, forests, fields, water, reliably reduces mental fatigue in ways that urban environments do not. The mechanism they proposed is exactly this shift from top-down to bottom-up processing. Nature does not demand effortful attention. It rewards the kind of open, receptive, undirected attention that allows the prefrontal cortex to rest and restore. The Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, the mindful, slow practice of simply being in a forest without agenda, has been found in numerous studies to reduce cortisol, lower blood pressure, and improve markers of immune function. The Voynich Manuscript is not a forest, but it shares with natural environments the property of offering bottom-up, attentional engagement, drawing the eye in without demanding effortful, goal-directed processing. There is nothing to solve when your prefrontal cortex is given permission to rest. There is only looking. And looking in this receptive and undirected mode is itself a form of rest. This is one of the reasons why the experience of looking at mysterious, beautiful, complex but undemanding things can precede sleep so naturally. The shift in attentional mode mirrors the shift in neural activity that accompanies the approach of sleep. The beta waves of directed effort give way to the alpha waves of calm reception. The prefrontal cortex quiets. The eyes soften their focus. The breath slows. You may notice this happening right now. The words may be arriving with less precise semantic processing and more of a general ambient quality. The meaning may be carried less by individual words and more by a general tone or feeling. This is not inattention. This is the beginning of the transition that the night is designed to accomplish. The words are doing their job, which is not to be understood with perfect precision, but to carry you across the threshold, gently. The Voynich Manuscript is there, at the edge of your imagination, with its patient script and its nameless plants and its circles within circles. It is not asking anything of you. It has never asked anything of anyone. It simply sits in its vault, age-worn and strange and beautiful, doing what very old things do, being a presence, being a reminder of depth and time, and the vastness of what we do not know. And you can rest in that vastness. You can let it surround you. The not knowing is not emptiness. It is depth, and depth in the right moment, at the right hour, is the most comfortable place there is. Let's speak about water for a moment, because water has always been the element most associated with the transitions of consciousness. Dreaming of water is one of the most universal human experiences. Rivers and oceans and rain appear in the dream imagery of people across every culture, every era. The ancient Greeks associated sleep with the river Lethe, one of the 5 rivers of the underworld, whose water, when drunk, produced forgetfulness, not the painful kind, but the restoring kind, the kind that allows the self to dissolve its accumulated weight and re-emerge fresh. Water appears in the Voynich Manuscript in its most mysterious section, the biological pages, where small female figures move through elaborate networks of pools and channels connected by pipes. The figures are sometimes described as bathing nymphs, sometimes as women undergoing medical treatment, sometimes as figures in an alchemical process. The pools are variously colored, green and blue and brown, and the connecting pipes snake between them in patterns that suggest circulation or flow, or perhaps something more metaphorical. No one agrees on what this section means. It is among the most analyzed and least understood portions of the manuscript. The figures are not quite realistic. They have a somewhat idealized quality. Their proportions slightly simplified. Their expressions serene or neutral. The pools they inhabit are not quite realistic either. The perspective is flattened. The geometry slightly dreamlike. The overall impression something between an illustration and a diagram. But there is something in the imagery that resonates with the experience of water in states of altered consciousness. the connected pools and channels, the figures moving through fluid environments, the sense of circulation and flow without clear origin or destination. This is imagery that the dreaming mind produces, often and easily. The hypnagogic state is particularly associated with water imagery. Many people report seeing rivers, or pools, or rain, or waves at the threshold of sleep before the more complex narratives of REM dreaming take over. If the Voynich biological pages are a kind of visual record of altered states, of the imagery that arises at the threshold of sleep or in states of deep relaxation, then they may be less mysterious than they appear. They may be a map of the same territory you are entering now. The small figures moving through the water channels of the manuscript are not quite here and not quite somewhere else. They are in between, in the pools and the pipes, in the warm green water of a space that has no clear geography, moving through a system whose purpose is not stated and does not need to be. This is a very apt description of where you are right now. You are in between, not quite awake, not quite asleep. In the warm dark of whatever room you're in, moving through the same threshold that the hypnagogic state opens. The figures in the manuscript are your companions tonight, not because they mean anything specific, but because they inhabit the same liminal territory, the threshold, the place that is neither here nor there, the water between the worlds. Let yourself float in it. The current is gentle. There is nowhere you need to go. The pools connect to other pools, and the channels lead somewhere, and the whole system is larger than any single figure moving through it. You don't need to see the whole system. You only need to be in the part you're in. And the part you're in right now is very close to sleep. Think about the handwriting. Someone held a quill, or perhaps a different kind of writing instrument, a reed pen, some implement appropriate to the period and place of manufacture, and drew those characters. Each character was a small physical act, the hand moving across the vellum, the pressure of the point determining the thickness of the line, the angle of the wrist shaping the curve or the straight. Those were real hands. They moved through real space. They pressed against real material and left a real impression that has lasted 600 years. We know from the flow of the writing, from the confident sweep of the characters, that the person who wrote this was practiced. They didn't hesitate. They didn't correct. The letters that have been compared to other medieval writing systems have the easy flow of a long-established script, as one handwriting analyst put it. This person had written in this script many times before. Their hand knew the characters the way a musician's fingers know a scale, automatically, without conscious thought, the muscle memory of thousands of repetitions guiding each stroke. What was in their mind as they wrote? Were they copying from another source, moving their eyes from an original text to the page in front of them? Were they composing in the way a writer composes, reaching for the next word, considering, placing it? Were they in a state of concentration or of relaxed familiarity, the way you might feel writing a word you've written so many times it requires no attention? We cannot know, but the physical evidence of the writing suggests someone at ease, someone who had found in this particular script a fluency that produced a kind of aesthetic pleasure. The characters are not simply functional. They have a visual beauty, a consistency of proportion, a regularity of spacing that suggests attention to how they look, not only to what they say. Whoever wrote this cared about the appearance of the page as well as, or perhaps, instead of, its content. Medieval scribes often wrote in states of deep concentration, sometimes described in contemporary accounts as prayer-like. The monastic tradition of manuscript copying treated the work as a spiritual practice, the slow, careful reproduction of sacred or important texts. as a form of devotion, a way of honoring both the text and the act of transmission. Whether the Voynich writer came from this tradition or from a secular one, the quality of attention visible in the writing suggests someone for whom the act of writing was not simply instrumental. It was not merely a way of getting words onto a page. It was something in itself, something worth doing with care. This quality of attentive care is itself something you can feel in the presence of very old, well-made things. The attention of the maker survives in the made object in a way that is difficult to articulate, but genuinely present. When you hold a bowl that was thrown on a wheel by someone who knew what they were doing, you can feel the quality of their attention in the weight distribution, in the curve of the lip, in the thickness of the walls. When you look at a painting made by someone who cared about each brush stroke, you can feel that care even if you can't name what produces it. The Voynich Manuscript has this quality. Whatever it says or doesn't say, whatever it means or doesn't mean, the care that went into its making is visible. The fluency of the script, the attention given to fitting text around illustrations, the coloring of the plants and figures, which, while approximate, was clearly done with consideration. Someone spent time on this. Someone gave it their hands and their attention and their hours. And that gift, that old, patient gift of attention, has somehow survived the 6 centuries between then and now, and arrived in this moment, in this description, in this late-night listening. Attention given with care travels further than anything else. It is one of the few human things that does not entirely dissolve into time. Let your own attention be given with care tonight to the darkness, to the quiet, to the slow movement of your own breathing. Let it be attention without agenda, without the need to arrive anywhere or understand anything. Just present, just here, just the simple, ancient, irreplaceable practice of being in a moment with full awareness and no resistance. The manuscript was made with that kind of attention, and it found its way to you, and you are here with it in whatever room you're in, whatever night this is, whatever country you're in, whatever quiet has finally settled around you. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. You have been with the Voynich Manuscript for a long time tonight. You've traveled from its discovery in a Jesuit vault in 1912, back through the courts of Prague and the study of a Bohemian alchemist, back through the hands of an emperor who paid 600 ducats for something he couldn't read, back to the unknown hands in the unknown place that first pressed these characters into vellum 600 years ago. You've looked at the script that follows statistical laws 500 years before those laws were described. You've looked at the plants that are almost plants, and the sky that is almost sky, and the water that is almost dreaming. You've sat with the question of whether any of it means anything, and you found that the question can be held without anxiety, carried without urgency, set down without resolution. This is the practice. Not the Voynich Manuscript specifically. The manuscript is just tonight's particular strange and beautiful companion, but the practice of sitting with what is unknown and not demanding that it become known. The practice of letting mystery be comfortable company. The practice of allowing the open question to be, as it is in the manuscript, a kind of text. Not a text that can be read, but a text that can be present with you, that can sit beside you in the dark, and not require anything of you except, occasionally, your attention. The brain that can do this, that can hold uncertainty without converting it immediately into anxiety, is a brain that sleeps better. That is not metaphorical. The neurological pathways that support tolerance for ambiguity are the same pathways associated with lower baseline arousal, with reduced amygdala reactivity, with the kind of calm, parasympathetic state that precedes healthy sleep, learning to be with not knowing is, in a literal neurological sense, learning to rest. The Voynich Manuscript has been your teacher tonight, a 600-year-old book in an unknown language about which the most that can honestly be said is, we don't know. And look how that not knowing has felt. Not alarming, not frustrating, not urgent, simply present, simply there, in the dark, alongside you, whatever the manuscript contains, language or cipher, or beautiful nonsense, or the private memory system of someone long dead, it has served its purpose tonight. It has been present without demanding presence in return. It has offered mystery without insisting on resolution. It has kept company the way the best company keeps company, quietly, without need, available when attention moves toward it, content when attention moves away. You can take that quality into sleep. The easy, unclenched presence, the willingness to be in the unknown without the compulsion to map it. The body already knows how to sleep. The mind, tonight, has been gently reminded of how to let it. Everything is exactly as it should be. Some things are meant to remain quiet. You can rest now. The manuscript will be there in the morning, in its vault, unchanged. The questions will be there too, not as urgent demands, but as interesting companions, light enough to carry through the day. The plants will still be almost plants. The script will still be almost language. The circles will still turn inward toward their unknowable centers. And you will have slept, and sleep will have done what sleep does, restored, reordered, replenished, returned you to yourself. And the day will come, as it always does, and it will be whatever it will be. And tonight will have been what it was, a long, slow journey in the company of something old and beautiful and honestly unknown. That is a gift. You gave it to yourself tonight, and it deserves to be received with the same graceful patience that the manuscript brings to its own not knowing. Sleep well, dream beautifully, and thank you truly for spending this night here. Good night.